We're gonna find the most important animal in all of Florida.
We're giving you 5 clues to figure out what it is before we find it. Let's hit the trail. These creatures require fire frequently. If they do not live in an ecosystem that is ravaged by fire, then they will not be able to survive and thrive in that environment. Without fire, the ecosystem gets so thick, the underbrush so thick, they cannot traverse through it to find their food. So these creatures require fire. That's the next clue. Let's continue on.
Our next clue is that these guys drag their bodies across the ground. Our next clue is that these guys have elephantine feet, which means their feet are like elephants. So they're not good at swimming, but they are good at digging.
This creature is a herbivore, which means they eat plants, but more specifically, they're a foliivore, meaning they only eat the leaves of plants. 80% of its diet is just leaves. And this is a perfect example of what they would be eating. This is known as the white beggar's tit plant. Look at all the leaves and even the flower petals. This is a perfect food source for the creature we're after. Let's continue down the trail and see what else we can find. So what we found right here is the last and final clue for this creature. These right here are actually the shed, the scales. These are actually called scutes of this animal, and it acts like body armor. What's really unique is that these animals are actually protected. Even though we found them, we can't keep them. Super interesting though, if you start on the inside, that's how old it was as a juvenile. And as it ages and sheds its skin, it grows growth rings on the edges, usually more distinct on the top part of this creature. Can you guess what it is? If you guess gopher tortoise,
that's correct. Gopher tortoises actually shed part of its armored body into plates like this one. But gopher tortoises are the most important animal in Florida because they provide homes for over 350 animal species in these fire-dependent ecosystems by burrowing down into the ground. That way the animals can get away from the fires, much like the eastern diamondback rattlesnake. Now remember, gopher tortoises are a protected species, so we can't keep anything that is part of a gopher tortoise.
Gopher tortoises live to be incredibly old for animals, up to 86 years, although the average for wild individuals is between 40 and 70 years old. Just think, these tortoises could have been born way back in the late 1900s. Gopher tortoises start out the size of a ping pong ball, about this big around, and they can get up to about 1 foot to 2 foot in width and almost 1.5 foot to 2 foot in length. They're relatively oblong, kind of like an egg. The best way to judge a gopher tortoise's size, other than measuring it, is by looking at its burrow. Its burrow's gotta be roughly a little bit wider than the gopher tortoise to allow it to go down. And down in the chamber of the gopher tortoise, which can be up to 40, sometimes even 60 feet deep, there'll be a little chamber where the gopher tortoise can turn around. So once it's started down that path, unless it's whittled out the edges somewhere along the way, it's gotta go all the way down in order to turn around. Gopher tortoises spend up to 18 hours in their burrows. Basically, they just sleep all day. Like most reptiles, gopher tortoises are cold-blooded, also known as ectothermic, meaning they can't heat themselves using their own metabolism. They have to use the sun's rays, or the ecosystem's temperature, to raise their body temperature. To do this, gopher tortoises will lay out on the apron of their burrow and sun themselves. Gopher tortoises are not critically endangered, like most people think, but they have made a very healthy recovery, and they're listed as vulnerable or federally threatened. These species are protected, and anytime you're in the ecosystem, don't touch them or harass them. Remember to give these animals, like all other animals, the respect they deserve.
A couple of the things threatening these beautiful gopher tortoises is actually road mortality, people eating them, and building on their natural habitat, which is known as urbanization. Now, the FWC says you cannot touch them whatsoever unless they are in the road, where you can move them off into a safe distance off the road and also in a direction they are heading. Just make sure you do not put these guys in the water because they cannot swim. They sink just like a bulldog.
Gopher tortoise females are much larger than their male counterparts. That's because they have to carry the eggs and eventually lay them. Gopher tortoise females can lay up to 9 eggs, but the average clutch is usually around 4 to 6. Depending on the temperature, The eggs will hatch around 80 to 100 days after they're laid. And normally, gopher tortoises will lay their eggs on the apron of their nest. That's why not only is the gopher tortoise protected, but so are their burrows and their aprons. The apron of the gopher tortoise burrow is that sandy part that is at the front of the burrow. Most of the time, that's where gopher tortoises lay their eggs. Some of the major predators of gopher tortoises are foxes, coyotes, but more importantly are the nest predators. Those are the raccoons, opossums, and skunks. These guys will dig up the nest of the gopher tortoise and eat the young before they even have a chance to hatch. One study found that almost 99% of all the eggs a gopher tortoise lays never make it to maturity. Gopher tortoises are the most important animal in all the southeastern United States, including Florida, because the animals that live with them depend on their burrows. It's been documented that 368 species depend on the gopher tortoise, making it one of the most crucial keystone species in the United States. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Two Wild Boys.
We hope you learned more about Florida's most important animal species,
the gopher tortoise.
If you want to learn more about other rare animals, click right here to learn about the flamingo.
We'll see you guys next time. As always, get out
and get wild.